Hello, fellow MSR Hubba owner. So the exercise here is to show that you can pitch a fly-only pitch, and by being able to do so, you can set your tent up completely dry. So if it's pouring rain, no problem. I did this last night just to figure out how it could work, and it was quite windy, so I still managed to do it. It was a little bit trickier. So with two people, it'd be easy, but for one person, you can absolutely do this as well. So here's the sequence. So start with the ground cloth. This is important because it lays out the corners where the poles need to be. And so if you don't start with that, it's hard to, really impossible, frankly, to get to the right dimensions. And since the fly isn't shaped well, since the fly doesn't have any shape to it, you're going to struggle to get everything set. So stake, just like you normally would, setting up the tent. Actually, typically you wouldn't do this normally. You just lay the ground sheet down. But if it were windy and you were doing a normal pitch, you probably still have to stake down the corners of the ground sheet regardless. Okay, step number one, just regular old ground pitch. You know, I figured out where I want it. I crawl around, I get all the twigs and whatnot off. Next step is to put the poles down. You're gonna put those down in the orientation that they would just normally go in, just like that. The tent, remember, it's safe in my backpack or under a tarp or whatever, in a stuff sack. So the tent is completely dry right now, and it's completely raining right now. That's our scenario. So you want to orient the fly in its orientation. So we know that that is the vestibule doors are coming off to the side, so they're crosswise to the ground cloth. And at this point, if I spread this out, I'm even keeping my ground cloth dry now. So whoa, there you see the wind. Okay, so let's move right along and handle the wind then. So staying low to the ground, I got my vestibule doors where I want them. And now I'm just gonna come around and I'm gonna start putting poles through grommets. That's a vestibule. Pole through the grommet. And so normally the first grommet is the ground cloth, then your tent, and then your fly, because of course you're setting up the tent before you put the fly over it. In this scenario, it's going ground cloth, and then the next grommet is the fly. At this point, it's all easy because there's no real tension on anything yet. Oh, and you know what? I forgot. This is very important. I've forgotten this twice now. The first thing you have to do is actually the cross piece. You should do this before you do either of the other corners. Otherwise, it's actually harder than it needs to be. But I think I can still do it. So anyway, when you're doing this for real, cross piece goes in first on the fly. So that's just attaching to you can see the challenge where I didn't do that first, but not a big deal. If you forget, it'll become obvious to you when you go to try and put in the other two corners, because there's no crosswise structure for the tent. Okay, so now you're going to see this thing start to pop up. That can help out by, trying to get the ridge line where it should be. If it was windy, that would be tricky, but so here I've got my fly grommet. So I go through the fly grommet into the ground sheet grommet, and now I got one more do over here, and this is where everything really starts to take shape, so you want to be a little careful here. The fly is at more risk right now for tearing than it would be doing a normal pitch. Come on, stay in there. Don't be ignorant. So I'm going through the fly into the ground cloth. Voila! So I now have fly only pitch. You can see the ridge line is lining up with the seam. Down here, all I have to do is tighten those up like I normally would, but probably what I'm going to do now is I'm going to deal with the tent. So, well, actually, before I do that, let me just show you what's cool about this. You really can set up this way and have this be the only part of the shelter that you actually deal with. You might have decided to leave your tent at home. So you can get a really nice tight pitch on just the fly. Tighten everything up nicely. And then in the same way that if you were in heavy wind with the fly over your tent anyway, you've got, you know, these two tie-out points where you would hook some extra guy line on, which you carry in your spares, you know, and take those down to a stake, right? But let's go ahead and keep setting this thing up. So, oops, zipper. You know, just staking out our fly vestibule as normal. So now I've got a completely enclosed, completely normal rainproof. There's a draft here, so you know you can see if there's ways that you could figure out to try and pull it down more. But since you probably be doing this in mild conditions or where you're not sure if you might get a little bit of rain and you decide to leave the tent at home, I don't think this really matters. And having airflow through the shelter is the major way you're going to keep condensation down. What's cool about this is, you know, you can just roll it up like you normally would, and hopefully you can see in there. I'm going to come check. I think you can see the fact that it's just like a, you know, you got the ground cloth, and in I go. I've got all this room over here for, you know, normal gear stowage. Leave this open. Check out the views. Nice cross breeze. Open up the other door. And if it starts to rain, whoop, and unless you pick the spot where you're going to get water coursing over you, which you shouldn't have done, regardless of whether you have a tent or not, you're going to be dry under there. You're going to have probably the problem that you'd have with a single wall tent, which is you're going to have more condensation. But the way you manage that in a single wall tent is, unless it's absolutely snotty out, you want to get some airflow going through anyway. And so just like on the Z-Pack tent, you know, you can always have one of these doors open. Now it's not a bathtub floor, it's just a ground cloth, but hey, that's classic ultralight style anyway. So anyway, this is really cool. Now here I go, I rescue my tent when I pack, I get it in here, boom. Tent is dry. There's no wetting on my tent other than any condensation that had formed the night before and stayed in there when I was packing it. Now here's the only subtlety, and it's really not much of a subtlety at all. which is that when you pitch this, the order of the grommets is going to be slightly different, right? So normally the layering is you put your ground cloth down, you put your tent down, you put the pole through the tent, or you put your pole through the tent grommet, and then the fly goes on underneath. In this case, the fly is actually on top, but it doesn't matter at all. I just, put the tent grommet on the, so, and again, it's not a big deal at all. There's nothing structural about that matters. And what it means is in the morning, everything's just going to peel off, obviously, in the order in which I put it on. So I've got tension on here because I got the fly ground down tight, but it's the only reason I was struggling with it a little. And actually, what's cool is you can actually do this from inside the tent. So if at this point I'm tired of getting wet myself, or now I'm kind of moving on the tent and I don't want to get the tent wet, peel off my rain gear, boom, put it right here, it stays dry. Now I'm dry, and as I'm messing with the tent, I'm not getting any of my own moisture on here. If it's really raining, close this back up, but I'll leave it open so you can see. And then you just start hooking things on, just like you normally would. I have complete access to the poles. I'm not going to hook it all on because what's the point? But, there you go. Hook, 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 hook. Now my tent's up. And then the last step, just like you would do with a normal pitch, is you connect it to the crossbars. So it's the opposite of pitching the fly only, where you put the crossbars on as your very first thing after you stake out the ground cloth. Here you do it last, just like with a normal tent pitch, because you're doing a normal tent pitch, it just happens to be undercover. And the reason is, as soon as you do this, the space that you have to work on is now, the tent is now up, right? And so you just do this last. And again, the grommet is going to go on in the opposite order that it would if you were just pitching the tent by itself first. But again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. And again, in the morning, when I'm ready to undo all this, boom, boom, boom. And let's imagine it's still raining in the morning, right? It's rained all night. I just reverse this whole process, right? I can, I guess all I'd have to do, in fact, I think I even tried this from inside the tent last night. You can even get the cross piece off sitting inside the tent. You just open the door of the tent and you can get this piece off, crawl out of the tent at that point, clip, 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 roll up the tent, rush it out, stuff it in its dry thing, deal with fly, give the fly a shake. After it's free, give the ground cloth a shake, roll those up and put them in the outside mesh pocket of your pack or into a stuff sack just so that they don't get stuff wet. And then rinse and repeat. So anyway, I think this is pretty cool. I don't know if anybody else has figured this out. Like I said, it was inspired by the sling fin dome tent. Is it a dome? No, it's, what do they call it? I forget what the sling fin two-person ultralight tent is, but they showed this and it didn't seem any easier than what I just did. So boom, there you go. They have a bathtub floor. That's like the only difference. They have a separate bathtub floor you can get so that if you wanted to just do a fly pitch and a ground cloth, then you'd have the bathtub floor, which would give you that, right? So, it would keep off moisture, it would keep rain from splattering in, but, probably if you're worried about rain, you're gonna go with your tent anyway, in which case it's fine. So anyway, I think it's pretty cool. I suggest practicing this and establishing that you can do it. Do it once with Nathan and then do it by yourself. And depending on what the weather forecast is, you can save pound. I don't know how much the tent body itself weighs. So there you go. And actually, you know, I just thought of this is if you do this with the fly, you could just get yourself just one of those inner bug nets that are super lightweight, and I'm sure you'd be able to figure out attachment points in here for just a mesh inner tent, and that might be a really lightweight option, and maybe do that before you buy a whole new tent and see what that weight would come in at. Anyway, hopefully you liked it. Hopefully it all came across clearly, and maybe I'll post this to YouTube. Okay, bye love.